Hello, and welcome to the first of our videos dealing with the contentious and hot button issue of abortion. So abortion is, it's something that in America has been in some ways removed from the political realm for close to 50 years in a U.S. Supreme Court case, Roe versus Wade. I'm sure you've all heard about. The Supreme Court found that access, well, this is where it's sometimes trouble that you have a lawyer as well as an economist teaching your class. I'm trying to get the legal rule right. It's actually as espoused in a follow-up case called Casey. Basically, states cannot unduly burden a woman's access to abortion up to the time of fetal viability, the time that the fetus could be viable if it were to be born at that time. So based on constitutional rights, the substantive due process clause, which is contentious in many ways, the Supreme Court said in the 70s that basically women have the right to have access to an abortion up to a certain point. That in some ways removed the issue from the political realm in the sense that with the constitutional rights, states can't make laws, the federal government couldn't make a law abridging those rights. We've seen states definitely pushing boundaries. They've made laws since then that have pushed what it means to unduly burden access to an abortion. And the time of fetal viability has changed as science has changed, and also, again, people have kind of pushed it if they're opposed to abortion. And so that's kind of been where the action has been legally. Right now, the state of Mississippi passed a law banning abortion at a much earlier stage than viability. And so a leaked opinion would overturn Roe v. Wade and Casey, the case that follows up on it. And so this would put the issue back into the political realm. And so we don't know at this point, when I'm recording this, if that's going to be the actual opinion that gets released as the majority opinion of the Supreme Court, and Roe v. Wade is going to be overturned. If that is the case, then this is an issue that will continue to be a hot button issue, in that it's going to be in the political realm. If the Supreme Court no longer says that there's a constitutional right to have access to an abortion, at least up to a certain point, then it's left to the federal government and or states to pass laws determining what the appropriate policy for abortion will be. And so that's why it is a hot button issue. It's very topical at the moment. When I've taught this class in the past, I've actually kind of sidestepped it and said, you know, abortion is one of many contentious issues, and it's one that is less squarely within the economic realm than some other issues. So in some ways that was a sidestep, right? And it was a genuine one, but with the legal developments, I feel like we wouldn't be giving the issue justice. The class wouldn't be living up to its name if we didn't take more head on the moral issue in a capitalist society of abortion. And so this week we're talking about healthcare. And so our first kind of glimpse into this issue of abortion is thinking of abortion as healthcare, or looking at that framing. The World Health Organization, among many other organizations, sees abortion as a healthcare issue. Now, a lot of people in the United States don't see abortion as squarely a healthcare issue. And so we'll continue to talk about this. It works pretty well in that we'll tee up the issue now, starting to look at abortion. We'll look at the perspective of the World Health Organization. It's one of the assigned readings. Is this a healthcare issue? And if so, kind of what are the implications of that? What is the World Health Organization looking for when it comes to resources, when it comes to access? Obviously, that's an international body. It is not set laws for the United States or any other country for that matter. So, what kind of laws would this international organization like to see, knowing that it cannot pass them? That's beyond its power, its authority. Next week, we'll be talking about a lot of different issues. It's kind of a grab bag of contentious issues in many ways. What they all have in common is this kind of trade-off between personal liberty, the ability of a person to choose what they would like to do, perhaps what they think is best for them, or maybe just what they want, versus more of a societal good or a societal norm, some sort of kind of broader perspective that, okay, that may be what you want to do, but this is what is best for the community, for the society, for a larger group of people, and we need to be conscientious of other people. Therefore, we should do things this way, not let people choose exactly what they want to do in every circumstance. It's a trade-off that we have all around us, and every law that we have is basically, is staking out some ground in that, right? We're allowed to do a lot of things. The default is we're allowed to do whatever we want, but we have a whole lot of laws that spell out things that we're not allowed to do, that will be punished with prison time or the death penalty or fines if we do them. And so, we'll look at things like drugs and alcohol and tobacco. We'll look at things like prostitution. We'll look at things like carrying guns, maybe handguns, maybe semi-automatic military-style rifles. We'll look at things like immigration. So all of these things are issues where there's kind of a balancing of are we going to let people decide for themselves what they want to do, or are we going to set rules that are kind of for the greater good in some sense? And if so, how do we decide what that greater good is? We've seen this issue a lot in COVID. We see that in abortion as well, right? And so we'll continue this discussion with abortion. Do we let people choose for themselves? You could be vehemently anti-abortion and that you think it's a morally repugnant act and you would never want to go through that, to partake in that act. But you could still believe that it's people's individual choice of what they should do. You can try to convince them, but believe firmly in an individual's right to choose, a personal liberty aspect. Or you could believe that abortion is a good thing, an important thing, an important tool for women to be able to fully participate in the workforce. In which case, you may believe that people states shouldn't have laws that restrict women's ability to choose. So really what we're looking at with these issues is at what level are decisions being made? Is it being made at the state level? Is it being made at the federal level? Is it being made way down at the individual level? And so with abortion, since Roe v. Wade, it's been determined at the national level, at the federal level, right? Because the U.S. Supreme Court, based on a constitutional holding, said women have the right to make this choice up to a certain point, the point of fetal viability. So the decision was kind of made at a national level. Now, if it gets made at the state level, that's kind of pushing down the level at which the decision is made, right? And so some people will live in California and abortion will be legal, and some people live in Mississippi and abortion will not be legal, right? So in some sense, that's pushing down the decision-making authority from the federal level to the state level. But it's actually more complicated than that, because in some ways, what the constitutional holding was that individuals have a right to choose. In some ways, the decision-making level right now is at the individual level. It honors personal liberty in a way that having states make their own laws will not. So it's kind of a mix right now between things decided at the federal level. States can't do whatever they want. There's a constitutional holding from the U.S. Supreme Court saying they can't. But that constitutional holding says the ultimate decision-making authority on this issue is at the individual level. It's part of someone's almost inherent due process rights, which we could go into a diatribe about whether substantive due process is a real thing or not and where to find it in the Constitution. That's not important for the moral purposes. But thinking about the locus of decision-making is important for the moral dimensions of this issue. And abortion, despite my previous sidestep, is undoubtedly an economic issue. It has large economic implications. There's economic research kind of on both sides. Most of the, there were 150 economists who submitted a brief to the Supreme Court basically summarizing empirical evidence of in states, so based on data from before Roe v. Wade when there was more variation, and looking at the timing of law changes to try to kind of carefully pinpoint a causal effect or at least a really tight conditional correlation, states where abortion was accessible and affordable, women tended to have higher workforce participation. There tended to be fewer children in poverty. I may assign that for reading, I'm not sure. You can certainly look it up if you want. It's an economist amicus brief. It's called, in the Dobbs case, D-O-B-B-S. And if you Google that, it will pop up. If you want to see that evidence, there's no question that it's an economic issue. You can argue against that evidence. I mean, all empirical evidence can be challenged in various ways. I'm not saying that's gospel, that it's right. But I'm using it as evidence that it is certainly an economic issue. We could certainly argue about the particulars, but it definitely does affect people in an economic sense. It affects their family choices. It affects their work choices. These are things that have huge implications for our economy now and going into the future. So we're not sidestepping abortion. We're going to take it head on. We're kind of taking it in a couple pieces, and so this is the first one. Kind of teeing up the issue, thinking about where we're making decisions. Is it individuals? Is it states? Is it at the federal level? We could talk about an international level, like the World Health Organization, but I think we all know that's not where these decisions are made. As I mentioned before, World Health Organization, we read their position on the issue. In some ways, it's a good starting point because it's a position that doesn't hold authority for actually making decisions in our country. So it's an interesting perspective, but not one that directly carries weight when it comes to policy making. So we will continue with this issue. We'll think about these personal liberty versus kind of greater good sort of arguments. And I'll just prime you for that, whether it's, abortion or prostitution or drugs. Maybe you're inclined to say those are all things that people should be able to do. People should be able to make those choices. Whether they're good things or bad things is perhaps an empirical question as far as the outcomes that come from them. But I think it's important for people to have the ability to make those choices themselves. Or maybe you take a position that all of those things should be illegal because they lead to bad outcomes that are bad, morally repugnant perhaps. And so what I'll kind of challenge you to start thinking about as we start to wade into this personal choice versus the greater good. And if you feel that way about abortion, prostitution, and drugs, do you feel the same way about guns? Do you feel the same way about immigration? And so, that it's fun to kind of search the basis for your moral code. What moral theory are you basing your beliefs on? I know for me, I get challenged every time I take on these topics because when it comes to the individual personal liberty, people having the right to choose versus the kind of greater good, social good. I come out in different places on these different issues. It's not always really easy for me to argue exactly why that is. I need to spend pretty good time thinking about why that is, why I may feel different about drugs than I do about immigration or guns or prostitution. And so that's something to start thinking about this week as we get ready for the week with a lot of contentious issues like those ones I've just been mentioning coming up next week. All right, thanks guys.